The state's being warned about footing their own bill for the tourism industry, that is to help the tourism industry, if states are keeping borders shut to those that have suppressed COVID-19. Now, WA would have to be a pretty good case in point, wouldn't it?
Well, what we're seeing is a different message from the federal government every single day about whether or not they support the hard border here in WA. We saw the Prime Minister say that he wanted to join Clive Palmer and tear it down. Then he wrote a letter to the Premier saying that he actually thought it was a very good idea to protect the health of Western Australians. And now we've got Simon Birmingham saying, oh, well, do whatever you want, but we'll send you the bill. I mean, this is just ridiculous. We've got a national cabinet. Surely they can discuss these things and come up with a plan.
Well,
or
what's
the Prime Minister's own...
I'll get your sparring partner in a moment on a plan for it. But what's the case right now for WA to keep up this hard border that they're talking about over there to South Australia, to the Northern Territory, to Tasmania, to the ACT?
Well, I take the word of the Prime Minister that he said last weekend that the hard border is in Western Australia's interests and therefore in the national interest. You can't move too quickly on these things,
in these other
Tom.
jurisdictions.
You can't move too quickly on these things. And what we've seen on the East Coast is that people are there are difficulties of people movement across the East Coast. We don't want to risk the health of Western Australians.
But what's the risk in South Australia right now? How is that any sort of risk? No one's getting in.
Well, but why would you start discriminating from one state to another? It is much easier to say we treat every state fairly. Western Australians very strongly
what's
support
difficult
this
about
policy.
It's not about treating them fairly. I mean, that means if Victoria...
The minute you start
hang on, by that logic, as long as Victoria has cases, you're going to shut to the whole rest of the country just because you can't discriminate. Is that really the logic? Discrimination?
Well, I think the logic is that you do these things slowly and carefully. I mean, we had to have huge rushes of action from the government in March and April to make sure that we protected the health of Australians. You know, you're not going to start rushing to open international borders. Why would you rush to open any border?
To help the economy and tourism and jobs. It's not a rush, but again, so if you don't discriminate, you say keep the borders up until every state, including Victoria, has it sorted. Until then, don't let anybody in. Is that what you're saying?
I'm very happy to act slowly on this because I don't think you're going to see, if you were to open a border here or there, I don't think you're going to see a rush of people wanting to travel right now. Let's not pretend that this is the solution to helping the tourism industry. There's 666,000 people who work in the tourism industry. I've moved a motion in the Parliament about the need to support the tourism industry more because they were
So if you open the borders up to South Australia, to Tassie, to ACT, to Northern Territory, it wouldn't help the tourism industry?
Well, the minute you do that, you're going to start to see the New South Wales Liberal Party, which they've done in the past, say we should start opening the border to New South Wales. I don't think you can...
They can say that, you don't have to.
Sort of a half deal. Yeah, but then I'll be on your program in 2 weeks' time saying, why won't you do what the New South Wales Treasurer says you should do? I'm happy to move slowly on these things. I think there are much bigger problems right now than just sort of a thought bubble from Simon Birmingham. Maybe if he really wants to do some work, he can think about what is the things that is going to bring more international tourists here once the vaccine is found and once we actually open our international borders again. That's his job.
I've neglected you, Jason Falinski. What have you made? I feel like we're playing our 1900 map soon of Australia. Do we need to get some guidelines from National Cabinet? I know National Cabinet and the Prime Minister says there's never been advice to put up borders, but do you need to put out... Does there need to be some sort of clarity on when it's definitely okay to open them up? You might say, well, if jurisdictions had no cases for 2 weeks, you should definitely open the borders. Something like that people can point to.
Oh, look, I think that there's always been a reasonably open view about what we should be doing, which is following the health advice. And the long and short of all of this is that, you know, the best way to get Western Australia to keep their borders up is to have people from the eastern states tell them. I think if we just stay silent or maybe say, you know, Western Australia should keep its borders up for as long as it wants, they will probably contribute that it's time to bring them down.
We're just struggling with that picture and connection, unfortunately, Jason Falinski. I might get our team to see if they can tweak that. I don't know if, well, I'm sure Patrick Gorman can make a bit of a NBN joke there if he likes, but I'll move on to another topic for you, Patrick Gorman. This might be one that you have more to say than Jason Falinski, if we can possibly sort his issue. The Clive Palmer case. Now, this is the case where the government, I should say, in WA is claiming it could cost the state $30 billion. Clive Palmer says that's not in any of his claims. It's a challenge to do with a mine. But the legislation the WA government says is needed to ensure this doesn't bankrupt the state includes even things such as banning various FOIs. What's happening here? It must be something we should move slowly on to, perhaps. We want to be careful about civil liberties.
Well, it's always difficult when you talk about Mr Palmer because there are so many lawsuits on which he's involved. There are cases that ASIC is pursuing against Mr Palmer. There are cases that Mr Palmer has brought to tear down the WA hard border. And then there's this case where he is suing the people of Western Australia. Look, I actually think the legal advice that John Quigley has received, the State Attorney General here, is that this is necessary to protect the finances and the operating of Western Australia. We saw some pretty strong words from the Premier yesterday that he would be faced with closing schools and hospitals if Mr Palmer was successful. He is a menace. There is a very entertaining front page on the West Australian today, and congratulations to whoever put that together. I like to think of Clive Palmer as the Karen of Australian politics. He is just annoying and he's only interested in himself.
But what about, we've got to be careful about this legislation too. As I said, it could ban certain FOIs, it could stop anyone taking action against certain decisions by the government. We want to be careful about how far we go, don't we?
Well, you do want to be careful about these things, of course, and I'm sure that the state government and indeed the state opposition, the state Liberal opposition, who are also supporting this legislation, will do exactly that when they legislate. They'll consider all of those things.
OK, we can see Jason Falinski's striking features in much better picture right now, so we'll
welcome back,
come
Jason.
back to you now. Jason Falinski.
It's been the saddest 2 minutes of my day.
Every time someone argues for a virtual parliament, I mean, this is on the parliamentary network.
Is it? Wow.
Are you on the NBN, Jason?
What's that?
All right, I don't know where to go with that one. Look, I'm going to try to resume control. Jason Falinski, I love that you're a straight shooter. So can you tell me the real reason the government won't allow bureaucrats from the Australian Border Force and Agriculture to give evidence at this Ruby Princess inquiry, which I'm sure you want to get all the proper answers to avoiding this happening again?
Tom, I don't know anything about that other than what I've obviously read in the newspapers. I assume there's some information that they don't feel is, is germane to national security, that they don't think should be discussed in open court, outside or an open commission. Outside of that, I can only tell you what I've read in the media.
Well, what I keep reading is the inquiry. We'd love to hear, for example, from the person from the Federal Agriculture Department that was involved in this decision to do with taking people off the boat who turned out to be, or the ship that turned out to be sick, and the inquiry can't get that person to give evidence. I mean, if the explanation you gave is true, do we need to hear that from the Prime Minister?
Oh, look, I think that in all of these, well, maybe not necessarily from the Prime Minister, but I think whatever the real reasons are, unless they go to, if there's a public interest reason for not disclosing those reasons, otherwise, we all want to get to the bottom of what happened with Ruby Princess. The inquiry has done some good work to this point in time, pointing out some of the failures that occurred at the New South Wales Department of Health level. If there's more information that will assist the Commission in uncovering what occurred, then obviously that would need to be done. I mean, maybe there are ways for the inquiry to go in camera so that evidence can be given without it being in open commission.
So if it's just some sort of, technically you're not in our jurisdiction, that wouldn't really wash, would it? I mean, we don't want people shielded just because they're federal and this is a state inquiry, when state and federal bodies have worked together on the Ruby Princess.
Well, especially, Tom, I would also say to you that one of the things about our federation is that we have shared responsibilities across a whole bunch of different things and services, probably in a manner and form that our founders didn't intend. So it has been extended. So, those sorts of inquiries where they may have been initiated by a state government, but there's benefit in us getting to the bottom of where there may be crossover or dysfunction or misalignment is kind of important.
I reckon that was pretty straight shooting Jason. So, Patrick, your turn now to also be honest, which we love on this program. Is it time for the Victorian government to stop quibbling over what date perhaps a formal or informal offer was in terms of ADF assistance on this quarantine and just say, well, clearly New South Wales and Queensland use the ADF. Clearly there was an offer there of some sort. There was a public one from the Prime Minister of Victoria. Should stop quibbling and just say this was a big error and ultimately was our call.
Well, I think you're right, Tom, in that in terms of what's important is not what happened yesterday, but what we can do tomorrow. That is a fundamental principle of politics, is that accountability about actions that have been taken is important, and I'm sure the full truth and answers on all of those matters will come out. But what actually matters is what happens today, what happens tomorrow. And so in terms of where you prioritise your time, I agree. Like, we should look at what can we do today, what can we do tomorrow to help drive down the curve in Victoria. I actually want to say,
what we can learn from yesterday, isn't that why it's important to say, not to talk about dates or, you know, some meeting, whether an informal or formal offer was made. Clearly there was ADF assistance on the table not taken up. Just say that and move on, because otherwise we're mired in this debate around statements from various people, and that's an issue.
Yeah, it's not a debate that occupies a lot of my mind. I do want to say, though, for the Victorians who are actually doing some incredibly tough work, I was talking to a very dear non-political friend of mine in Victoria yesterday afternoon, g'day Craig, about sort of the sacrifices they're making. Like, they're doing that for the whole country. They are going through an incredibly tough time to stop this spreading across the entire country. And so from the backwaters of Western Australia, which is, I know how some in the East Coast think of us, I do want to say a huge thank you to all those Victorians who are doing incredibly tough work.
Well, hear to that, and look, you never know where this might strike next, and it could be another state. So let's hope those figures are pretty encouraging today, that there is some progress on this. Just finally, an issue close to your heart, Jason Polinsky, and I saw you wade into Twitter. You're getting quite combative on Twitter, actually, lately, and I like the sort of tone.
Watch out.
I'll have a crack. This is to do with Sydney apartment...
The lockdown has not been good.
Sydney apartment buyers and why they're paying too much on properties. It's to do with zoning restrictions and so on. You tweeted essentially your support for relaxing these. Would this mean in your area 20-storey unit blocks going up, all in the name of affordability?
Look, Tom, thank you for that question. It certainly wasn't provocative, and it clearly wasn't designed to get me in trouble with my electorate. I really appreciate that. I think what I would say is that this is a report from the Reserve Bank of Australia, and yeah, this is an issue that is quite close to my heart, and I'm sure to yours and Patrick's as well, which is that because of planning laws, in particularly on the East Coast, I'll say, Patrick, the time of having to say that, we have a situation where the Reserve Bank has revealed that people in Sydney are paying up to $400,000 more for an apartment than they need to, simply because of poor government regulation. Now, you know, if Patrick and I got upset about poor government regulation, we'd be upset, 26 hours a day. But the fact of the matter is that where this is having the impact of locking an entire generation out of the housing market, it simply put is not good enough. And the Reserve Bank's announcement and analytical analysis and the data that we've been looking for on that, I think is an incredibly important turning point. To make this even more disappointing, however, is that the response of the professionals in this area, the academic urban planners, has been to say, oh, no, it's not caused by the regulations that we've been advocating for. It's all this other stuff, like apparently people get paid too much in Sydney. That's the problem. In terms of your other question about where these zoning laws should be resolved, I mean, the Minister for Transport in New South Wales has been talking for the last 7 or 8 years about value sharing and how you can align building homes for for younger people closer to transport hubs. We haven't had that, and that's a really critical point. In most large cities, whether it be Perth, Melbourne, Brisbane, but particularly Sydney and a little bit of Canberra, you have people building homes far removed from where transport hubs are. And what value sharing allows you to do is to align all of that. So, yeah, this is a really important policy, I think, for the entire nation.
I see you nodding there, Patrick, nearly out of time, but your thoughts on this?
I've got to end this by saying Jason is talking a lot of sense. It's not always where we end our interviews, but We do need to reform planning laws to make sure that people can afford a home of their own. Obviously, I've been critical of the government in terms of their investments in social housing and the need to invest more in social and public housing, but we've got to accept that most people aspire to own their own home, and planning laws are a huge part of that. The state government Metronet program here in WA is all about making sure that you can have more houses near public transport, exactly as Jason suggests. This is a good thing, and good on the Reserve Bank for looking at Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne. Maybe I'll look at the West sometime.
That last answer just leads me to this question. I better clarify this, Patrick Gorman. Are you calling for WA to secede yet, or are you waiting a few more weeks?
Let me get on the record now. I am probably out of step. I am not a secessionist. I think we should remain part of the Federation. I would miss Jason too much if we were to secede.
And I would miss you, Patrick.
I'm a vote Remain.
All right.